As you guys may know, JPEGMAFIA, we are in the midst of a new album cycle from him. Experimental Rap is the title of it. And I'm excited for the record. Many of you are excited for the record. And many of you have also seen this recent to-do, this beef that he has had between him and Earl Sweatshirt because of a clip that surfaced from this interview from Pigs and Planes. Shout out to them. Pigeons and Planes, rather. This sort of drama that's come out of this clip of him kind of like subbing Earl over him wanting to change his sound and this and that, and they had a back and forth. It was, very, petty, and resulted in a lot of people sort of like hating Peggy's guts. Even a lot of fans like taking issue with him firing at Earl sort of seemingly at random, for kind of the second time. He's had negative comments to say before about Earl's music. Of all the negative things going on in music broadly, why Earl Sweatshirt is a focus for Peggy, I don't know. Earl, there's been tension with Arm & Hammer in the past. I mean, these are all cool artists that, you don't want to have on your bad side, especially if you are like more of an underground artist. More likely than not, you are going to be sharing fan bases with these people. But Peggy does not really seem to care. But again, that sort of all arose out of a clip from this interview, which there is now the full version of on YouTube, all 23 minutes of it, and we are going to watch it, react, comment, probably a Danny Brown sub 2 midlife crisis quip. Maybe, while I don't think Peggy is beyond going at Danny, over some random shit, who the hell knows? Danny always changes up with each album cycle. Danny's always doing something new and doing something different with each new album. And, he kind of but like broke out pretty late into his life, later than I think a lot of people do. So I don't know. Yeah. And good point. Like, his one of his idols is Kanye, who famously, very deep into age, certainly 40 plus, has changed up his sound numerous times, on many occasions to appeal to younger listeners, here and there. So again, it's just like not a very flattering argument, especially given like the last time he had anything to say about Earl and the Alchemist was that they were just kind of making the same fucking song over and over and over. And it's like, okay, well, while I wasn't really crazy about the change that they brought to the table on this new record, Earl, Mike, Surf Gang, like it is something new. It is something different. I myself, having enjoyed Live, Laugh, Love, thought like, well, some of this is getting a little repetitive and a little predictable. At least he tried his hand and at something different and took a risk, Peggy hasn't been good hasn't been good since 2020. I don't agree with that, especially since like that's a little too early, I think that's like right after Veteran. You're telling me the next record was bad? I don't think so, especially with LP being so good, but we can disagree. Let's give this thing a watch.
I'm true punk rock. Like when you bring up my name, you get a real visceral, actual like reaction. I really hate this guy. All the other shit is a joke, but this guy I really hate, and that's real punk rock. I've always been myself. I've always known who I am, and I've always spoken my mind. It's gotten me in trouble. It's gotten me kicked out of places. It's made people not like me. To this day, it still makes people have obsessive parasocial hate to me. And it's like, that's the price you pay for being a real motherfucking person.
Okay, that's just the intro. Which I'm sure he's going to say more around all of these statements. That's clearly like a bit of a supercut there. But I will say sometimes people do kind of misconstrue being punk with being hated. And while being punk and being true to your ethics can certainly lead you to places where you're controversial, people aren't agreeing with you on everything, I think it matters who is mad at you and who isn't, like considering the source of the anger, like do I think attacking or do I think being hated because you're attacking Earl makes you punk rock? Not necessarily, not that having a strong opinion and voicing it is wrong.
How's life? How are you?
Pretty good.
What's been taking up your time? What you been up to?
Work.
Yeah.
Strictly just work.
You worked on the BTS album?
Yes.
Which I think surprised a lot of people when they saw that announcement. Tell me the story, how'd that come together?
The most punk album of the year, by the way.
BTS reached out to me and asked me to work on their album, which I didn't have a name at the time. I've, worked with Flume, I've worked with Maxo Cream, I've worked with BTS, I've worked with the Gorillaz. My sound and my palette just expands in places that other people can't exist. So it's not really that surprising to me.
And I'll jump in before Peggy sort of finishes this thought and just say, like, I'll say as much as I can kind of like joke about it, I don't really think it's a bad thing he worked with BTS. I don't really have anything against the BTS collaboration. I think generally speaking, they're a pretty uncontroversial group. And, in addition to everything he just said here, Peggy has done and worked into his repertoire, pop covers, singing Britney Spears tunes, Carly Rae Jepsen too, right? If I'm remembering correctly. So yeah, Peggy does have a wide palette, and for a long time now has made it no secret. Like, he is a pop fan. He has an ear for pop. I think oftentimes, like, people kind of underestimate him or try to pigeonhole him as somebody who has no wider or broader pop appeal, and just sort of like talks about him as if he is simply just like, scaring the hoes music and only makes music that's abrasive and freaky and off-putting to people. When he actually does have a fair amount of songs that are super catchy, and in the right context, his production actually can work in a pop context. But, again, I think, the reason people pigeonhole him that way is mostly off of the vibes that he tries to give off during interviews like these, where he's, kind of giving some Undertaker energy, I guess.
I cannot stress this enough. The most professional artists I've ever worked with in my life. Yeah. Most artists you interact with are children at their core. They're people that got money when they were young or came from money, or they're just stupid ass people in general. BTS is completely professional, completely like straight focus, always working. I love that shit because that's how I am in my private life. So walking in there, it was just very easy.
Yeah.
Just kind of throwing in to say 2 cents are, I'm not really surprised by that at all. They literally run those fucking K-pop groups like it's the military. They make them suffer until they're doing exactly the right perfect dance moves, all in like, unbroken sync with no flaws whatsoever. Of course, they're like working quickly and fast and getting it done. That's how their whole business operation operates. With that being said, I think that can lead to dynamics where maybe we're sort of making quick decisions for the sake of efficiency without thinking about whether or not they actually sound good. And I think that's really where the new record kind of suffers. But, at least on the back end, in terms of working with other artists, I'm glad it's efficient and, got Peggy some credit and apparently got him paid too. So it's not a bad thing.
I noticed you haven't been on Twitter very much in the last 6 months. You've been kind of away from social media. Can you talk about just kind of why you made that decision? And
I made that decision because for me, Twitter is a promotional tool, and it's a place where I put like a persona in order to get attention. And I see that for some people, that is my...
I think he's probably been on Twitter a little bit to sort of like take a peek and see what people are doing and saying. But with that being said, any thoughts or takeaways on the entourage he's surrounded by right now? It's yay coded. Is it yay coded? Possibly it's yay coded. It's very, again, like evil mastermind. These are my henchmen. I'm surrounded by my henchmen. And we're about to do evil unto you.
Whatever. My persona just works too well. I've stated everything that I was trying to do at the beginning of my career, and people just forgot or something and pretended like I'm not doing what I've been doing. So I just got disinterested in people character assassinating me just because like they don't like my music or something. I think it's weak and childish and just like pretty much bitch made energy.
With him talking about the persona element of this, I have to ask, like in the opinion of chat, getting a sense here, how much of the Earl beef, how much of this, how much of the experimental rap thing, like how much of it is like a persona, him I don't know, doing a kayfabe, doing an act, him just trying to get a rise out of people? And how much of it do you think there's like genuineness behind that? I'd be curious to kind of like get a sense of from chat, honestly, because I have my theories. I think he's saying a lot here and doing a lot to sort of just make people pissed off. I, think there's an element of true feeling behind it, but I think he's probably like hyperbolically overstating a lot of certain things or getting really aggressive with certain feelings he might actually hold, but, kind of exaggerating them for the sake of like, getting people's attention. It does feel like wrestling. And I don't know if you caught Peggy on his most recent tour, but kind of a key element of the stage presentation was, again, he was like surrounded by a bit of an entourage and he was walking out there with like a big old fucking custom made wrestling belt, which honestly was a sick ass belt. It was a sick belt. It was a really sick, cool looking belt. And I'm surprised even in sort of like a post Griselda era that there aren't more rappers and artists sort of like having their own custom wrestling belts made. But I do think sort of like the theatrics of wrestling are inspiring a lot of this album cycle so far. Reminds me of how wrestlers will refuse to lose matches out of ego. Yeah, maybe a little bit. If you're new to listening to JPEG, where should you start? Probably veteran. I would say veteran. Liam Gallagher of rap, possibly.
Your next project called Experimental Rap.
Yes.
Tell me about the story behind this one. First, we'll start with the title and then get to the music.
Well, with experimental rap, I just wanted to lay claim to something I already have. I'm already the best in this space of experimental rap. There's no one who competes with me. There's no one who does what I do. There's no one who is able to like do this. And that's why I'm not copied. I don't have many type beats. It's not because people don't like me. It's because people cannot do what I do. So me naming it experimental rap is just me laying claim to something I already had. People act like experimental rap and experimental hip hop is some kind of...
Oh, okay. Let's stop before he goes into this next point that I've already seen. I feel like there are some spaces where this comment would go unquestioned, and I feel like almost in a way this categorization is being forced upon him. But people categorizing Peggy's music, normies as it were, have been calling it scaring the hose music for years. People have been acting like his music is too weird and unlistenable for your average person for a long time. And again, this is like mostly a normie sort of take and sentiment, despite the fact that there are artists out there who I think you and I know that have made way more abstract music. There are examples like Death Grips that you could say who, maybe you could make the argument that Peggy is still sort of like reigning supreme in this lane, given that Death Grips, for all that we know, is like not really active right now. We all hope and pray for a new record, but that's certainly not guaranteed. Who the fuck knows if there's going to be a new Death Grips record? Genesis Owusu, I think, is like too much of a genre blender to categorize himself or sort of like stick to one single genre. It could be the case, though. I don't know if he sort of like sees himself primarily as a hip hop artist. Hip hop is certainly a huge influence in what he does, though, clearly. But with that being said, like the new By Storm record just came out. Armand Hammer not too long ago dropped Diabetic Test Strips, which is like one of the most out there, boundaryless, sort of like mind-bending rap records of the decade so far. Other people have sort of brought up the fact that Dalek is still very much active, and Clipping are a pretty freaky group by all accounts. I feel like he's almost kind of like embracing this label because this is sort of like the way people kind of deride him, by saying his music is too weird, and almost like the Earl sort of like jabs that were being made at him in certain comments, like, oh, his music is crunchy and gnarly and da-da-da-da-da. I feel like this is a very easy take to have about him if your view of left field hip hop and weird hip hop doesn't really go that deep. It's sort of easy to sort of see Peggy as like, oh, this is like the weird rapper who, sort of the weird rapper du jour. So, whether he's laying claim to it by virtue of being the most experimental, I'm not really sure. He may be sort of doing it in his own mind by virtue of like being the guy who is sort of defined in that lane while simultaneously having at least a little bit more mainstream exposure than the average artist in this scene has gotten. Because as much as we love, By Storm, Billy Woods, Death Grips, so on and so forth, none of them have a Ye feature. Or a Ye sort of collab and crossover. None of them have a BTS crossover. and collaboration. So, I mean, I think there is something to be said for the fact that like he has taken a pretty weird left field sound and has been able to sort of like grow a platform off of it that is, arguably one of the most mainstream somebody who to come out of this lane has ever really had.
It's associated with the dirtiest people. It's not fun. It's not like, it has no identity. I've said this before, conscious rap has an identity. When you think of conscious rap, you think of Nas. When you think of just mainstream rap, you might think of Future. When you think of like, whatever, this kind of rap, that kind of rap, there's names and faces you can apply to it. When you think of experimental rap, it's just like,
No, okay. I'm gonna hard disagree with this because just as chat exemplified, like when you think of experimental rap, there are numerous names that you think of. Nobody like just has no names. Like again, maybe if you're a normie who the only experimental rap artist you've ever heard is JPEGMAFIA, which there are people who are like that. Hey. Edward Skeletrix too comes to mind for some people as well. Even names and faces like, as somebody brought up Genesis Wusu earlier, I would say to a degree because he has made rap songs here and there, though he's a very versatile artist. I'd say Dean Blunt too. There's a lot of names that come up. If you actually follow the scene and you care about it. Last thing I'll say before he goes off on this comment that people have like tied to Earl is, while the experimental rap tag, I don't think is inherently a bad thing. And I think sort of, in our own minds as fans, compiling all of these artists into a scene is also not inherently a bad thing. I think like defining yourself in that way and laying claim to that title as like the guy, the experimental rap guy, does kind of like come with it creatively a bit of a burden. And I think, I've been feeling this a little bit, especially in the wake of these two teasers that we've heard from this record so far. Because what's kind of like struck me about these songs is that by usual Peggy standards, they are not that experimental. They are not that experimental. And in fact, I would say they're a little paint by numbers. When thinking about numerous tracks that have popped up on either Veteran or LP or his latest album. They're not sort of like, pushing the envelope in any way. Are they decent by his usual standards? And do they sort of like contribute to, a style that I feel like we're all familiar with at this point? If you've heard his, all of the material he's done since Veteran. Yeah, but it's like not still pushing the boundaries to the point where I would call it experimental. Like it doesn't feel like he is experimenting in a way where he is giving us a new sound we haven't heard before.
Be cool and try to like pretend like, oh, I want to be over here. I don't want to be experimental rap. I want to be something else. I want to fucking rap like Lucky. I want to do this. I want to make like songs that the young people make.
Another thing about this comment that has been tied to Earl that kind of bugs me is that I don't think Earl considers himself to be an experimental rap artist. Or has Earl ever, chat, please correct me on this, maybe there's reason for this comment. Has Earl ever derided experimental rap or artists in hip hop who are more experimental, on the more experimental side? I don't think Earl thinks of himself in that way, or that him trying to do what he was doing with Surf Gang was him running away from experimental rap. Given everything Earl has done up until that point, trying what he tried with Surf Gang was actually like kind of experimental for him. Like maybe not experimental in the grand sense of things for rap music, but certainly on the cutting edge of what's new and young and hot and sort of like, trendy and something different that he hasn't done before. So again, I don't really get the perception of Earl or whoever else. Somebody was saying maybe earlier that these kind of views or the comments could be directed at Danny. Like Danny's new record is arguably one of his most experimental. So, Danny is being quite experimental on his new record. I just don't really get this point of view. Who's running away from being experimental? Who's trying to avoid being experimental? I don't really know. What do I think of his fit? I think it's very I think it's very wrestling heel.
Was there a goal? Was there an overarching vision? Was there like something you were striving for with this one?
I wanted to make something that improved on the last album. I feel like my last album, I Laid Out My Life For You, was the best album I've ever put out. And musically, how accessible it is, I loved it. So I wanted to expand more on that while not doing the same thing.
And this did pop up on the teaser, the first teaser track. Does that mean we're going to hear more metal riffs? Which, if so, that's not a bad thing. you know, but if we're going back to that, I would hope the guitar work is more interesting than it was on the first teaser.
I feel like there's been a lot of talk about the current state of rap. People have had critiques about it. Do you think experimentalism is what it needs? Like, it needs more of that?
I'm not sure. All I know is that it doesn't need whatever's going on now because people are doing the same thing. These labels, these really big labels are just, I guess they're tired of signing, you know, kids from the projects who don't know any better. So they're just putting their own kids in there. So it's just all kind of, I don't know, Nepo baby music or something.
Is he saying record execs are making their own kids rappers, or are they just sort of saying they're putting their own kids in the music industry generally? I think he means just like, I think he just means in the music industry generally, which, I mean, I'm not going to disagree. Like, things are trending in more and more and more of like a Nepo baby type direction. Tu Hollis is also an example, but like his father with his ties to Tortoise is not like an industry executive, you know, in my opinion, though I know his mom is more tied. You know, maybe Tu Hollis is an example.
I think most musicians, especially nowadays, are just Nepo baby weirdos who already come from money and have no context to what it's like being a regular person. They've never had a regular job. They've never had to struggle to pay rent. They've never had to do any of these real things. So they come into the game already with money, make more money, and develop an insane ego, and then start saying the goofiest shit possible. So no, I don't think musicians are good role models because most of them are dumbasses and most of them don't know how to be adults. And I think we should start listening to rappers and musicians less on real world issues because these people are multimillionaires and they have no context to anything, you know?
I mean, he's not entirely wrong. He's not entirely wrong. You know, I will say some of what he's saying is a little diametrically opposed because he decries the fact that there is sort of like a vapidness to music broadly, and the Nepo babies in the industry aren't really talking about anything, but simultaneously musicians should not be looked up to and looked to sort of like speak on certain issues. You know, Lord knows as much as I think it would generally be a good thing that, you know, someone like Taylor Swift maybe speak out you know, on the case of Palestine, you know, even just like a simple free Palestine can do so much to sort of like, you know, spread conversation around the issue. But like, do I think Taylor Swift should do a whole sort of TED Talk dissertation on the topic? Fuck no. No, absolutely not. I think really what he's saying here is like, don't really look up to the current sort of like, you know, generation of a lot of the most popular Nepo baby musicians out there right now because they don't have sort of like the context and real world experience of anybody who maybe in the past might have come from, you know, a regular lifestyle like you or I may have at one time. Just to, you know, also kind of like make things clear while doing this, and YouTube and social media has certainly become my job. I'm not a fucking Nepo baby. Okay. And had to do this shit, you know, for years before it was my full-time thing. And, you know, had to sort of like come up off of like working in a pizza place and doing dishes and paying off a college loan and a host of other things. So
I have money as well, but it's like, you can put me in there too. Don't care. Don't listen to what I say about anything, but all I'll say.
Don't listen to Peggy. Fuck. Don't listen to anybody. I guess you're throwing me in there too. Don't listen to anyone. Fuck.
Saying is this: before I got into the music industry, I worked regular jobs. I struggled to pay rent. I was a regular motherfucking person. And then at 28, I started making money. So I think I'm a little bit different.
Do you want to be a hero?
If someone thinks of me as a hero, I do not care. Like, that's great. Let me rephrase that. That's great. Not that I don't care, but it's just like part of the job. I love making art. A byproduct of making art is making money. So like, I didn't set out to be like, I'm gonna just make money, but like, it's a byproduct of the art. So I understand that. I understand that some people will see me as a hero. Some people will see me as like the worst person in the world. That's their issue.
There's a fine line between seeing somebody as a hero and looking up to somebody and appreciating someone and liking someone, or, you know, admiring someone for the thing that they create or the thing that they make, whether that's a song or a painting or, you know, a commentary or a book or whatever. There's a fine line between the two. They're not the same thing. You can appreciate somebody and have a normal, healthy sort of perception of another person while just liking what they do without thinking of them as a hero, without sort of like looking up to them like they're a god. Some of my biggest influences, both musically and in sort of, commentary, news, cultural dissection, have disappointed me at times, and sometimes it's to the degree where I kind of rationalize it and I'm like, well, it sucks. I'm disappointed about it, but it doesn't really kind of take away the value of their work in the past to me. And sometimes it's like, it's so bad. It's all case by case. It really kind of depends upon the thing, it's not like, as much as some people may like to act like it's the opposite. I'm not typically the type of person, the moment, anybody disappoints me in any way whatsoever, it's like, I'm flushing you down the fucking toilet and going crazy, especially since, I believe in the concept of redemption. It's like, even with recent comments that I made on Ye and Bully, I personally think it's a good thing that he has gotten sort of like back on track a little bit and is not using his platform to spread fascism. And I hope he continues to stay on that path. And if he does continue to stay on that path, I see no reason why he shouldn't be able to pursue his career in the way that he wants. Not everybody has to like him or listen to it or enjoy it or get on board with it.
The things that I've been doing in music, the things I've been talking about, the way I attack white supremacy consistently throughout my career is the reason why I might get more hate than the average person, the average rapper in my lane. So I think I'm a trailblazer in that aspect. I'm true punk rock. Like, when you bring up my name, you get a real visceral, actual reaction. I really hate this guy.
Okay, that's the context this comment comes up in. I think like the most obvious response to that is like the fact that you did cross over with and collaborate with Ye in the midst of like, his anti-Semitic fascist freak out. But still, with that being said, I can't acknowledge the fact that like when it comes to not Peggy's earliest sections of his career, but when he was really blowing up, like he was putting a lot of white supremacists and white supremacy on blast and catching, I think, like an overt amount of flack from those types of freaks on the internet. And I've seen it myself. He inhabits a very odd space, and has for a long time. The content of his music and the stuff that he says, if people are very sort of like, right-wing adjacent and paying attention, it gets them really pissed off and riled up because he is saying like confrontational shit to attack those individuals. Even in his own recordings, like worked in, I believe, audio, and this is like kind of a very big to-do when he was first blowing up, worked in like audio of a cop being murdered in one of his songs. And I know he does talk about Ye in a bit, and we will get into that. So, I don't want to completely, I know there's some people that'll bring up the Ye thing, and I understand the significance of that in this context, but I don't want to engage in that. I don't want to engage in a total erasure of that very real history of sort of like the years of kind of like attacks and harassment that he's received, because of comments he's made about racists and, the right wing and his music and on social media and so on and so forth. Like there is a real history there, regardless of any inconsistencies. And that's where I kind of disagree with what he's saying. It's not like the record is completely inconsistent, but I would say it's mostly consistent. It's mostly a very consistent record on, this issue.
The wireless thing, now he's banned from being there, and then the whole festival got
okay. We're talking about
canceled. So, like, when you've seen everything that happened this week, what is your take on it?
My take is that if Ye looked like Justin Bieber, none of this would be happening. I think that there's no, benefit of the doubt for black men. And I think that's what you're seeing with Ye. Ye obviously has mental problems. He's obviously said things that hurt a lot of people, but he said a lot of different things. He said slavery was a choice before. He said like numerous offensive things before. All to me in a state of like...
I think I have to pause there. I think I have to stop it there, regardless of the point he's trying to finish off in this moment, and say, I think we all recognize the fact that things with Ye, as far as his public comments, were getting progressively worse. It's not like, the slavery was a choice comment just happened in a complete vacuum, and there was a total and, complete mea culpa over it. There are still a lot of, and this came up in a lot of recent coverage I saw around Bully and talking to other content creators and music commentators who I'm friends with on this topic, who are not white, who said that to this day, like, I've been a little kind of out of the loop with Ye, or have been sort of like, looking at him with a bit of a side eye ever since the slavery comments. There's still a lot of people that kind of take issue with that commentary. And again, it's not like it just happened and it stopped there and everything surrounding that was just hunky-dory. Like, there was a progression of events with Ye's sort of like, right-wing flirtations getting worse and worse and worse. And I'll say this and acknowledge this as somebody who happened to enjoy a lot of the music and output that he came out with around that time. Around that sort of like 5-album project run where all the records were 27 minutes and he put out Kids See Ghosts. Like, that was when he was rapping about people telling him he couldn't wear the MAGA hat. Again, it's not like these things happened in a vacuum. I will rewind a little bit more and say the Justin Bieber comment, it is kind of crazy. I mean, I sort of like, get sort of the general double standards argument when it comes to white people and black people in terms of how they're treated across all sorts of different systemic outcomes, be it through school system, court system, traveling, visas, policing, everything, literally everything that you can name in terms of like a systemic outcome. I get the double standard argument in general, but we don't have a whole lot of analogs for this, honestly. It's a very difficult point of comparison to make. I'll say, noting this, I think this is a pretty important thing to note, and it just kind of came up in my head because I was just listening to their new record to review it. But Kneecap, like, not even off of going as far down, I would say not far at all, down sort of the fascist rabbit hole in the way Ye did. They've been banned from traveling to perform over here, just merely voicing support for Palestine. And were pretty much almost put on trial for their pro-Palestinian comments and, having a flag on stage with them when they were performing too. So it's not like, white artists and, whiteness, I feel like, is very much like a super Western, super, sort of like racist kind of like construct to create this racial hierarchy. And there were points in American history where Irish people were not considered white and were only, considered to be generations down the road after they, were sort of like seen in the whiteness project as a group of people who could sort of like further be used as a wedge to divide things racially in this country even further. And Italians the same. In modern contexts, Kneecap would very much be sort of like considered a white group to your average American perceiving them. And they themselves have, gotten the short end of the stick in terms of like social political commentary and that preventing certain opportunities from them. And again, they weren't even embracing fascism. They were just voicing support for Palestine, voicing anti-Zionist sentiments. So, I mean, honestly, I think it's a bit of a boneheaded argument and does a disservice to other socio-political causes going on right now, in my opinion, given the Kneecap point of comparison.
That's how people choose to look at it. And I feel like people choose to look at that for certain artists. Elvis fucked a 14-year-old girl and married her or something like that. And people still call him the king. He died on the toilet.
It's not untrue. It's not untrue. It's not untrue. It's a based opinion. It's a based opinion. That's a fire take. That is a fire opinion. Personally, as hard as I have been in terms of criticizing Ye for his comments, I would still like to see him get better. I would still like to see him do better. I would still like to just see him stop, and he has stopped, as far as I can see. Simply boiling it down to him being like, oh, well, if he was a white guy, it would be fine. I just don't really see that as if like it's purely white people and white audiences who, in regards to Ye, are playing judge, jury, and executioner, because while, yes, it is true, I don't disagree, there are a lot of white people who are upset and angry with him over these comments. Simultaneously, we've been on social media. We see the reception. We've seen the videos of the mosh pits at the shows most recently that he's been at. The majority of the people who showing up at those shows are white. The majority are white. We can't just sit here and act as if like, you know, it's white audiences who are purely like just being like, nope, you're not allowed. You're bad. You're terrible. Like when Ye was fully like 2 years deep into the Nazi spiral, it was not black audiences who were writing for him. It was like the toxic weirdo Groyper Nick Fuentes types, because that's literally who bro was associating with. While I do get it, I think that white people culturally in society can be very unfair to individuals, successful or not, who don't fit into sort of like what they view as a mold of normal, either racially, sexually, gender-wise, so on and so forth. Kanye is a really unique case. I won't disagree that there are certain bigotries and sort of like, you know, glass ceilings he has faced over his career, you know, due to not being white. But simultaneously, white people fucking love this guy. I think we can make the argument too that it's also really fucking soon. You know what? The Hitler song's not even a year old. The Hitler song is not even 365 days old. And Ye is an artist who historically like will take something back, will apologize, will try to bounce back very quickly from a super hot mic or controversial moment, and has in most of those instances been given the grace that Peggy here is talking about. But this is like the 12th plus time. And I feel like out of the gate, most people, especially millennials, white or black, who were there for all of those times are like, nah, this is like the 12th time he's apologized for shit like this and just immediately went right back to that shit. Again, I'm crossing fingers. I have faith. I want him to do better. That's the outcome I want to see. But like your average person who's not a commentator and is just merely listening to Ye for entertainment, I don't begrudge them the feeling of just being like, nah, it's too much. I'm just going to tune out. I'm gonna just focus on other things because I don't need the fucking hassle and headache of worrying about where this man is at. You know, because he's been too inconsistent too many times. We can't just sit here and simply act like this is the first time Ye has gone overboard and said some shit and then apologized. You know, again, if this were somehow the first time, that would be one thing. But it's in a series of disappointments that a lot of people collectively remember, especially if you are on the older side of his fan base and you were in college when College Dropout came out. You know, if you've been aware of Ye and his career for that long, a lot of these comments hit different, especially since like kind of seeing him at a point in his career where he at least in terms of how he presented to the public, seemed like such a different person.
And then last question, since you haven't been on socials, haven't been interacting with your fans as much, what do you want to say to your fans right now?
Nothing.